Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to part 21 of Qur'anic Contemplations, where we are going to be contemplating selected verses from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to be looking at the 21st juz in this section. And the first ayah we're going to be looking at is from Surah Ar-Rum, verses number 2 and 3, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ ألف لام ميم غُلِبَتِ الروم. The Romans have been defeated. في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون. In the nearest land, but they after their defeat will overcome. And this is based on the time in the life of the Prophet ﷺ when the Persians and the Romans were having wars and battles between themselves. And in one of those battles, the Persians had a monumental victory over the Romans. And the Mushrikun, they would side with the Persians. Why? Because the Persians also committed shirk, while the Romans, they were from the Ahlul Kitab. And so the Quraysh became happy because the Persians had defeated the Romans, who were Christian. And in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Muslims about this defeat that the Romans suffered. And as a result of this defeat, the Quraysh were mocking and making fun of the Muslims because the Romans, who were from Ahlul Kitab, had been defeated. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us about this battle that took place between the Romans and the Persians, this decisive battle, which was a great monumental victory for the Persians. And He describes where it took place. And He says, في أدنى الأرض, in the nearest or lowest land. And what's interesting about this verse is the word Adna in Arabic could mean the nearest land, meaning the land which is closest to another land, because this battle that took place between the Persians and the Romans was in lands between Palestine and Jordan. So this was the area in which the battle took place. So not only was it a place which was close to the Muslims, it was close to the Arabs because it was in Sham, which was nearby. But also another interesting benefit from this word that's used, this specific word Adna, the word Adna can also mean the lowest land. Adna referring to the lowest land. And scientists have actually discovered that this area between Jordan and Palestine is geographically the lowest land on the face of the earth, meaning the land that's lowest and closest to the sea level, or the lowest land. In fact, I think it's even below sea level. This land is the lowest land on the face of the earth. And so this is something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam over 1400 years ago, that this battle would take place fi adna al-ard, in the lowest land. And what's been discovered is that this land is actually the lowest land on the face of this earth. And again, how could the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam have known this over 1400 years ago? And this is from the miracles of the Quran. The second verse we're going to be looking at and reflecting on is in Surah Ahzab, verse number 4, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us about the human being and the nature of man. And He says, مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. Allah has not made for a man two hearts in his interior. Meaning Allah Azza wa Jal hasn't given man two hearts. A man only has one heart. Now, why doesn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention just men and women? Why specifically does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say man here? And what's beautiful is, of course, that we know as human beings that women, it is possible for them to have two hearts. They can have two hearts. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions only men here. مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ. Allah hasn't made for a man two hearts. The women can have two hearts. How is it possible for a woman to have two hearts? If the woman is expecting a child, she could actually be possessing two hearts in her body, her own heart and the heart of a child. In fact, there could be even more. If she has twins or triplets, she could have multiple hearts beating it at the same time in her body, subhanAllah. And this is from the miracles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this verse itself, the detail and the specificity in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions certain words and uses certain words really show us the thought and the attention to detail which is given. And this is, of course, something which we wouldn't have any doubt in, because it's the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why Allah Azza wa Jal here, He says, مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. Allah hasn't made for a man two hearts in his interior. The third verse we're going to be looking at is also in Surah Ahzab, verse number 13. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a group of people who were trying to persuade the Muslims not to fight the non-Muslims. And of course, this group were the munafiqun. So the munafiqun, the hypocrites, they wouldn't want to fight the disbelievers. They were only Muslims outwardly, whereas inwardly they were disbelievers. They weren't Muslim, and they would do whatever they can to dissuade others around them from the Muslims and each other to not only not do those things which they were required to do as Muslims, but in fact, try to cause more harm to the Muslims and try to cause splits and divisions amongst the Muslims. And of course, they were people who were brought up, or they were originating in Medina, meaning in Mecca there were no hypocrites, there were no munafiqun. Why? Because in Mecca the situation was so severe that only those who really wanted to be Muslim were Muslim. Whereas in Medina, because they were living in comfort and luxury, there were those who just wanted to pretend to be Muslim outwardly, whereas secretly they wanted to cause harm to Muslims. There was no real need for a person to have to pretend as if he's Muslim in Mecca, because of the harm he may have to deal with. Whereas in Medina, of course, they had this interior or ulterior motive. And so the point being here, the hypocrites were in Medina, and of course we know the name of Medina before it was called Medina by the Prophet ﷺ was Yathrib. It used to be called Yathrib. And in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that these groups of people, the munafiqun, they called out to the people of Medina, to the Muslims specifically, and they said, Ya Ahla Yathrib, O people of Yathrib. Now, why did they say, O people of Yathrib? Why didn't they say, O people of Medina? Why didn't they say, O Muslims, for example? Because, of course, according to the Muslims as a whole in Medina, the hypocrites, they were outwardly Muslim. So why wouldn't the hypocrites just say, oh Muslims? Why wouldn't they say, oh Muslims, oh believers? Why wouldn't the hypocrites say, oh people of Medina? Why did they specifically say, when they were calling upon the Muslims, oh people of Yathrib, Ya Ahla Yathrib? And one of the reasons for this, and Allah knows best, is that the munafiqun wanted things to remain how they were and to go back to how they were before the Messenger of Allah came to Medina and before it became the headquarters and the capital of the Muslim Empire. And so they were longing for the olden days, and they had the mindset of Jahiliyyah, the days of ignorance. And of course, because of this mindset, they still considered Medina not to be called Medina, but to be called the old name, the name which they would prefer, because those were the days that they preferred and they liked and they enjoyed, the name Yathrib. That was the old name of Medina. And this is why in this verse they say, Ya Ahla Yathrib, O people of Yathrib, because they want people to go back to the olden days before the Messenger of Allah came, back to the days of Jahiliyyah, back to the days of ignorance. And this is why here in this verse they say Ya Ahla Yathrib, and they don't say Ya Ahla Medina or Ya Ahl al-Islam or any other term that may be used. Jazakumullah khair for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.